Welcome to One Tired Teacher, episode 138, How to Successfully Integrate Science into the Second Grade Classroom. Oh, it is so easy to feel like there just are not enough hours in the day to cover all the standards that we need to cover in our first and second grade classrooms. And I really feel like often primary teachers in general feel like their number one task is to teach children how to read and how to add and subtract. But we know that teaching children how to read is really priority number one. So what does that mean for our content areas like science and social studies? This is where integration for bringing in content areas into your reading blocks makes a lot of sense and can honestly be sometimes the only way that we ensure that these major subjects and topics are covered. So today I'm focusing on science as I am passionate about science and STEM. And in fact, the very basics of STEM is integration of multiple disciplines and how they naturally interweave. So let's talk about how we can successfully integrate science into our second grade classroom. I hope you stick around.
Welcome to One Tired Teacher. And even though she may need a nap, this teacher is ready to wake up and speak her truth about the trials and treasures of teaching. Here she is, wide awake. Wait, she's not asleep right now, is she? She is awake, right? Okay. From Trina Debery Teaching and Learning, your host, Trina Debery.
Hey, okay. So if you are not a second grade teacher or even a first grade teacher, you're probably thinking, well, how this isn't going to help me. Like, how is this episode going to help me? Why is she specifically talking to second grade teachers? Well, I want to get a little bit more specific with the podcast, and some of my topics will be in general for teachers, and it won't matter what grade level you're teaching. It can be, applied or made. I can't think of the word. Adapted. It can be adapted for your grade level. It can, you can use it anyway. But also sometimes I'm going to specifically be talking to second grade teachers and a lot of times first grade teachers as well, because those are the two grade levels that I have the most experience in. And being a media specialist, I did for a shorter amount of time. So that gives me a lot of insight into all grades. But I really have some things that I want to focus on that are specifically to second grade, because that was the grade that I taught the most. And I have some ideas and some things that can specifically help second grade teachers. So if you are a second grade teacher, this is definitely for you. And if you're a first grade teacher, there's some things that you might be able to adapt for yourself too. And if you're any other grade, then I love for you to stick around, but I don't want you to feel like I'm only talking, to second grade teachers. So, because that's basically what I am doing. So that's all up to you. All right. So let's talk about integrating science or even STEM concepts into our reading block, because it's a lot. It takes a lot. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to talk about some of the challenges that lie ahead when we're thinking about teaching science in first and second grade. And as I mentioned, primary teachers, they have a top priority of teaching children to read. But that doesn't just encompass reading stories and poetry. As much as I absolutely adore fiction, and I think it should have a higher priority than it does sometimes, teaching children to read also includes nonfiction, and that's otherwise known as informational text. And this is where science and even social studies can come in. Math as well. All the other content areas that are facts, that are informational and that give us information and teach us are part of teaching kids to read. So what if instead of choosing random informational text passages, we actually found intentional books, articles, podcast episodes, videos, passages on science topics that we need to cover? Now, don't get me wrong. It can definitely be a challenge to address curriculum expectations in a meaningful way, where students are engaged and motivated throughout the entire lesson. And for many kids, just reading about a topic does not bring it to life. This is where I think science experiments, hands-on learning, makerspace even, can and should come into play. But how does this work in an already crowded schedule? This is where I think intentional planning comes in. And here is what I typically do each year. I'm kind of going to go over, I'm going to like do like a think aloud. I'm going to go over some of the things that I think about each year when I'm looking at standards and I know I'm trying to figure out what I have to cover and how my year is going to look, when I'm going to do what makes sense, what my district tells me I have to do, how I might be able to get around some of that. And I'm going to kind of just lay it out for you in hopes that it helps you think about how you might do that yourself. I know when I first started teaching, I had very little guidance. We were in the middle of the war of whole language versus phonics versus balanced literacy versus whatever. And to a sense, I feel like we kind of have come back to that. It looks a little bit differently, has different names, and there's different things, but it's still that age-old conversation about what's more important. And so in that beginning time, we had very little direction. Like, I don't even remember getting the standards. That's how crazy it was. And we called them benchmarks then. I didn't even have them. I didn't even know what I was supposed to teach. So it was very unclear. And I feel like we do that sometimes when we jump into new standards. And like Florida teachers might be feeling that way right now because they've just adopted the Florida best standards, which I'm not even going to mention. Well, I'll talk about them a little bit, but it's frustrating to me when a state takes some of something else and then pretends like it's theirs. And they also leave out stuff that I think is really important. And, curriculums and standards get a bashing even though the state might not have implemented them very well. But that's a whole nother subject. So anyway, so I had very little structure in the beginning. And then there was other years where it was like, you've got to do exactly this and everyone must be on the same page. So it's been like a world of difference in teaching. So no matter where you are in that realm, if you have a scripted program or you have nothing, this is still a good idea for you to understand what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, really looking at that big picture thinking, which I did talk about on, I can't remember what episode it is, but I'll link to it in the show notes. I talked about big picture planning because I think it's important, even when we're handed the information, it's important for us to understand where we're going. It really helps us get there. So just keep that in mind. All right. So, let's see. I think it makes it a lot easier for me when like I said, when I look at standards and I think about what I need to cover. So this is where that intentional planning really, really comes in. And typically, I look at my curriculum maps and I think, here are the standards that I need to cover in my ELA block under informational text, because my district usually breaks it down into like parts of it are fiction, parts of it are informational. And so I go, okay, what are the standards I need to cover for the first 9 weeks? And I usually like to plan in like, units. That's how I like to do it because I like to have just some consistency. So the back and forth flip-flopping isn't a way that I like to plan. So just keep that in mind. If that's something that you do, then, you do you. But that's something that I don't feel like you're building upon for kids. So the whole, I'm going to do fiction and then informational, then fiction and informational, or I'm going to do, fiction and then I'm going to find an informational piece that goes with this fiction I'm reading. To me, I just feel like that doesn't really make sense. I'd really rather have a concrete plan, a unit of study, if you will, on, the standards I need to touch on for literature. And then I'm going to have a concrete nonfiction informational unit, and I'm going to cover specific standards. So let's talk about those, because the ones that are supposed to be covered in the beginning of the year in my state is asking and answering questions, central theme, and text features. Or actually, I should say that was really the past. Those were the standards that we covered in the beginning of the year. In the first 9 weeks, those are the ones that we were really going to hone in on and teach in the first 9 weeks of school. We were going to teach all of the standards, all of the 9 or 10. I always say 9 because 10 is like on grade level text, but and being able to choose. But when I think about all of the 9 and standards in informational text, I think, all right, if I touch on all of them, but I'm really going to hone in on these 3, asking and answering questions, central theme, and text features. Now, this year in Florida, like I said, the Florida best standards, which do have a lot of similarities, but they have more focus on some standards and they have left out other standards, and they've actually left out asking and answering questions. Now, that doesn't make any sense to me. And but they didn't ask me, so that's okay. And I didn't tell them, but I'm going to tell you, I think inquiry-based learning is powerful stuff. And teaching children to ask higher level questions and answer those text-based higher level questions really leads to deeper comprehension and understanding of the topic. You will gain a wealth of information around the questions students ask. But if Florida wants to ignore that, so be it. So in this case, if you're from Florida, like myself, these are the standards that need to be addressed in the first 9 weeks of school that are informational. And that is, how do text features contribute to the meaning of a text, which that's the same as the Common Core standard of text features. How do the relevant details within a text support the central idea? Again, we're talking about supporting details and central idea, same thing. And how can I compare and contrast important details presented by two texts on the same topic? And we actually had that standard as well in the Common Core. It wasn't written exactly like that, but very similar. And so they just brought in compare and contrast early on, as opposed to what we did in the past where we didn't bring that in right away. But I don't think that's a problem, because especially when you're doing a unit of study on informational text, and if you are integrating science, which this is the conversation that we're having, you are going to want to do different books on the same topic. If, for example, I am talking about matter, states of matter, there are tons of different books on the states of matter, and I'm going to want to read several different versions, or I'm going to want to read one, or maybe listen to a podcast on states of matter, or maybe watch a video on states of matter, and that gives me a lot of really great opportunities to compare and contrast. So now I have those standards covered, or in my mind, about what I want to do for the beginning with ELA. So I know I have to address those. Now I don't have to address them with random topics. I can now take a look at the standards that need to be covered in science. For me, I always start with a really solid understanding of what is science and what is engineering. And I already feel like I am starting to touch on the STEM principles when I bring in engineering. It's not just the principle of science, it's also what is engineering. And I will want to really dive deeper into asking and answering questions, science questions, making plans, creating a model, revising, creating a solution, building and working through the engineering design process. Now, my particular district focuses on the nature of science, but I think we are so far behind in the area of science. We haven't even begun to look at the next generation science standards, which makes little sense to me. But when we look at that, like asking questions, making observations, and gathering information about a situation people want to change or define a simple problem that can be solved through the development of a new or improved object or tool. That's one of the engineering standards, K2. And then another one about developing a simple sketch or a drawing or a physical model to illustrate how the shape of an object helps its function as needed to solve a given problem. So those are the engineering standards. So I want to have those in my mind. Now, my district, so I usually do start with, like I said, an introduction to science and engineering. And I do have a STEM unit that I created. I have 4 STEM units that are covered because we really go deeply into science, and it's integrating reading and informational text standards because I want it to hit on all disciplines so that I'm saving time instead of having to have a completely separate science block every single day, because I know I can never get to it when I was teaching science. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm carving out days of the week where I'm teaching science in my reading block. And so then I can protect that 1 or 2 days of my science time so that I can do a makerspace activity, an engagement activity, or a hands-on science experiment. And because I know I don't want to lose that. I need that for kids. It's important for kids to get their hands dirty, for kids to create. It's important for kids to understand concepts by moving pieces and watching things react. And so that is important, and I don't want to go away from that just because I'm trying to integrate everything into my reading block. So I want you to keep that in mind, because that can really mess you up if you don't have any of that time. So I spend a good 4 weeks focusing on the the nature of science and what is engineering and what is science. And I really break it down into some again, solid ways of integration. So let me just give you a few examples of that so that you can kind of understand what I mean. So like I said, I break out the standards that need to be taught. Now in my district, we start with the nature of science. So I'm covering all those science topics. I'm just adding a few extra engineering standards because I really want to focus on the next generation science standards, whether my district thinks it's right or not, which I think is crazy. So I'm really starting with that engineering design process. I think it's important. It's, that design thinking is 21st century thinking. I really think it's important for kids. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. All right. So this is what my science block might look like. If, usually I only had like 20 to 25 minutes. That's why I'm thinking if I can really get some of that into my reading block, then I don't have to think about having 5 days of science because I know that that's going to be difficult. I know that I'm going to really need to have some of that time be for hands-on exploration, and the other times we can really be digging into informational text in a variety of ways. So, for example, let's look at week 1. In week 1, now I might need like 10 minutes in my science block. So I'm going through procedures and routines throughout my whole entire day. And so that's no different than what I'm going to do in my science time. And this might be where I talk about like procedures for makerspace or procedures for STEM or science. I might do the same thing on Tuesday and that's kind of integrated throughout all disciplines in my classroom because we're really learning procedures and routines in those first few days, and especially in that first few weeks. I don't even really try to teach content on those first couple of days. I'll sprinkle it in here and there, but I especially don't try to teach science content because I know that we're really focusing and practicing on those routines and procedures. It's not really until Wednesday that I decide if you have a 5-day week. Like we're starting on Wednesday this year, so that would kind of change things. But if you have a 5-day week and you started on Monday and you have a couple of days of procedures and routines, I might do what is science and what is engineering, which I actually have an informational text passages on this. And I might want them to really be thinking about that. And, this is where we might do, what we already know, what we want to learn. And we might do a KWL. We might just have a conversation. I might show a little video, and it doesn't have to be super long or go on and on. It can really be, and these passages are actually really short. So that's when I can start to focus on asking and answering questions, and I can model asking questions, and I can model what it looks like to answer questions about science. And that's how, I'm starting with an inquiry question. Like, what is science? What is engineering? So I'm already starting to talk about those standards in ELA that I'm now doing with science. Does that make sense? And then on Thursday, I might do an engagement activity where I might just read Ada Twist, Scientist. Now, again, I can really, since this is a fictional book, I can focus on my fiction standards, but this is also starting to talk about science. So do you see how it kind of blends together? And now that can go on during my reading block. And even Friday, reading Rosie Revere Engineer, again, can go in my reading block. I don't have to have a separate science time. And I probably won't get a lot to science in that first week. So I think that is really helpful. And then even when I move into week 2 and I'm like, what are tools used for science and engineering? That's just one short little passage about tools that we use where kids can be engaged, and then that maybe they can even start to explore. So I might have some science tools out that they can look at and they can move around, and maybe we could rotate different teams and look at some of the different tools. Or I might do that little reading passage, and I might do that in my reading block. I might do the reading passage in my reading block and then talk about maybe the central theme or whatever standard I want to focus on that's ELA related. I might stick with questions, asking and answering questions for a little while because that makes sense. And then during my short little science time on Monday, that's when I can let them kind of play with the tools, with the science and engineering tools that we have so that they can really start to see what's available to them. And then on Tuesday, I might focus on some academic vocabulary. We might start talking about some of the terms of science and some of the terms of engineering, and we can do some mixing and matching games and things like that. So I hope you're starting to see how that can kind of like blend in together, because I think it's important. All right, so then as I was saying, so if I go back to thinking about my district and then what they want me to focus on, which is the nature of science, they also want us to start with matter, which the Next Generation Science Standards focuses on that too. And the thing that, like, I'm fine with starting with matter, but the only thing is that I really want it to get it as close to Halloween as possible, Halloween or Christmas. And the reason that I say that is because I've created a really fun unit that takes the states of matter and we do them with like Halloween things. Like I get these little trick-or-treat bags, and I've got 3 balloons, and one balloon is filled with air, and one balloon is filled with a marble, and one is filled with water. And they have to put their hands in the treat bags without looking, and they have to feel around, and they have to think about the characteristics that they're feeling. They have to make a prediction about what they think it is, a solid, liquid, or gas, and then they get to, find out and write down their conclusion. And it is so fun. And then another one is they're like feeling in these little jars, and they've got like spaghetti, like for brains, and an eyeball in vegetable oil, green vegetable oil, like gooey eyes. And and then, so it's just fun to make it like a holiday theme. So, and I have a unit on matter for Christmas and for Halloween. I originally created at Christmas because we used to teach matter at that time of the year, and I thought, oh, this is so fun. And so they did all that activity basically in a Christmas stocking, and then we did some things with hot chocolate, and it's so fun. I'll link to both of those in the show notes too if you're interested. But then I had to change it to Halloween because they changed when they wanted us to teach matter. That's partly why I take so long with an introduction to science and engineering, because I really want to push it. I want to push matter to Halloween. So that's one reason. Whenever we can make it fun, I think we need to do that. And that matter unit also has original informational text with a focus on asking and answering questions, central theme, and you guessed it, text features. And so that is when I'm integrating that into my reading block, so I don't have to take my whole entire non-existent science time. And at the same time, the students they are doing several experiments with matter using those themes. And so I think that can be a lot of fun. So I hope that this has given you like a better look at how you might integrate some of those ELA standards with science. So basically the first thing you're going to do is look at your ELA informational text standards and see what you have to cover. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to look at your science standards and what you have to cover, or if you choose to do social studies. And then you have to think about what pieces of text or what sources of information can I use that are going to help my students really understand asking and answering questions. Central theme is a pretty easy one to do. And details when you're looking at informational anything. If you're looking at informational podcasts, informational videos, informational, passages. So I think that makes it easier. And then text features, that is, we often find really good solid text features, especially when we're looking at captions and bold print and titles and headings and things like that. Really important elements to help kids better understand text. But this can all be based on the theme that you're doing, or the topic, I should say, that you're doing in science. Whew, I hope that makes sense. And so some good news. I do have a freebie that you can grab, which is an introduction to science. And if you can catch it in the show notes, I'll actually put it in the show notes as well. But you can also, if you just go to my website, TrinaDeberyTeachingandLearning.com, it's a pop-up. So that means if you're on the site for a few seconds, it will pop up and say, here, you want to grab this. And so you're giving me your name and your email. That puts you on my list, and then I share things out every week. Last week, I gave away a Meet the Teacher night packet, and which I sell in my shop for $6. So I gave that away for free to my email list because I wanted to tell them thank you and I want them to have a really great back to school year. So anyway, so you can hop on my list and grab some freebies. You can know when deals are happening and get some tips and things. I'll let you know when one tired teacher comes out. And you can also get my free introduction to science. So I'm hoping that you are starting to see how you can actually successfully integrate science into your classroom. One of the most powerful strategies that we have in our toolboxes as teachers is really taking a cross-curricular approach in planning lessons and units for the school year, as we're able to incorporate curriculum expectations from just a variety of subject areas to create that engaging activity. By developing cross-curricular activities that are both fun and motivating, we can easily integrate science into different subject areas. It only requires a little bit of planning and creativity. And in this case, I've done some planning for you. So if you're like, I don't have time for that, I can't figure out how all the pieces go together, that's okay. That's okay, because there's not a lot of time for teachers. And I'm really going to dedicate my time this year to creating resources for teachers that helps give you back some of your time and also helps you help your child and your children to fall in love with learning. So if you need some of that time back, let me do it for you. So I have that first unit of STEM, the STEM unit, and you can grab that freebie of introduction of science. And so you have some of these things. And if you want to do the holidays matter or the Halloween matter unit or the Christmas matter unit, then you've got all your matter science standards covered. So that can be really fun. All right, so we already know that science and math are pretty easy to integrate together. And now I hope that you're starting to see how science can integrate into your ELA block. But did you know that science can be creatively woven into other subject areas? I know. Science can be integrated into English language arts, the arts, health, and physical education, and social studies. It can even be integrated into social studies. I think that's crazy. And you can do these engaging lessons that your students will just love. Let's look at some other ideas where science can be integrated into the day. Some of these areas can even be done in your special area rotation, which takes a lot of pressure off of you. And teachers have a lot of pressure. So some of the things that we can do is science and the arts. And that is by incorporating science and the arts together, students will be immersed in an activity that allows them to experience and express the natural world around them, which I think is so cool. Like for example, they could teach the elements with mixed media. I think this would be a really cool thing to do with like the water cycle. They might do this in art, produce watercolor paintings, or they might use clay to discuss the Earth's crust and the effects on temperature and pressure that they have on materials, like when we talk about erosion and things like that. So I think that would be really cool. We might demonstrate science concepts through movement. They could do this in PE or even in your classroom. Getting up, the students can get up out of their seats and move around. Not only will students be incorporating science concepts through drama activities, but they'll be able to stretch and move around and help students release a little bit of that energy so that they can focus. They can act out like the states of matter, like as a frozen piece of ice melting into a pool of water and evaporating into vapor. And this same concept can be used with like the water cycle or the layers of the earth. I just think that can be so cool, and we want kids moving. Another way to integrate might be in PE, where they can take part in fun and lively physical education lessons that incorporate science concepts in a unique way. They might do a nature walk, they might look at removing litter, or they might measure and inventory trees and plants when you're looking at life cycles and plants. And there's so many things. Teaching science with social studies, like history and science, fit together seamlessly. Scientific innovation has been a driving force in societal change. So to put it in perspective for students, have them consider what life would be like without the internet or without their devices. I mean, can you imagine? And what this would look like. And that's when we're starting to integrate science and social studies, which I think can be great. So many ideas. So, as you can see, teaching science is important and it is necessary. And yes, it can be done. So, I'm linking in the show notes to my science bundle because I have done little individual science passages and a bonus experiment for the whole entire year. And that's where we go over like 9 different subjects, because I added every topic that we ever had to teach in second grade, which certainly covers the topics that you have to teach in the next generation science standards as well. I'm going to link to my STEM units that's specifically geared toward next generation science standards and can also be integrated in your ELA block. And I'm going to link to my Matter units because I think those are so fun. All right. I hope you have a great year in science and that this has been somewhat helpful to you. I appreciate you, and I am so thankful for you as a listener. I'd love for you to rate and subscribe to the show because I need a little bit of feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, this one tired teacher is getting excited about serving you. Sweet dreams and sleep tight.